This video will go over all of the methods to solve quadratic equations. If you haven't watched the video on graphing quadratics, factoring quadratics, the square root method, the quadratic formula, or complete the square, you need to watch those videos first. You must understand each method before you begin. We're going to start with solve by graphing. On this graph, I have x squared minus 4. If you remember from our transformations, the minus 4 means that I have my parent function shifted down 4. So if you want, you can first graph the parent function, which is the one that you should have memorized. You could sketch it as 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 4, and 3, 9. Negative 1, 1, negative 2, 4, and negative 3, 9. Then I'm going to shift every point down 4. Once you have done that, you can erase the parent function because we only want to graph x squared minus 4. When you solve by graphing, you are looking for the x-intercepts. So in this case, I am crossing the x-axis at negative 2, 0, and at positive 2, 0. Those would be my solutions. Moving on to factoring. With factoring, you have different types depending on your problem. This problem has two terms, so I know it's either a GCF or a difference of squares. In this case, this is a difference of squares. I can take the square root of 4, and difference means subtraction. X squared minus 4 would give me two factors of x plus 2 and x minus 2. Those are my factors. Now to solve them, x plus 2 equals 0 or x minus 2 equals 0. For the first one, when I subtract the 2, my first answer is negative 2. For the second one, when I add the 2, my second answer is positive 2. Moving on to the square root method. The square root method is when you're trying to get x by itself. So my first step is to move the minus 4. The opposite of subtracting 4 is to add 4 on both sides. Now, to get rid of the squared, the opposite of squaring something is to square root it, and I get plus or minus 2. Moving on to the quadratic formula, I'm going to write the formula out first. My a value in this case is 1. Since I don't have a middle x, my b value on this one is 0, and my c value is negative 4. Now I'm going to plug those three things in. Opposite b, there's not really such thing as negative 0, so I'm just going to write that as 0 plus or minus the square root of 0 squared minus 4 times a, which is 1, times c, which is negative 4, all over 2 times 1. To simplify this, 0 squared is 0, and negative 4 times 1 times negative 4 is positive 16. 0 plus 16 means I have the square root of 16, and that's a perfect square. The square root of 16 is 4, and this will simplify to 0 plus 4 all over 2 and 0 minus 4 all over 2. The first one, 4 over 2, reduces to positive 2, and the second one, negative 4 over 2, reduces to negative 2. Our last method is complete the square. I put an asterisk on this one because you typically won't do complete the square when your b value is 0. However, for the sake of this handout and what we're comparing, I am going to go ahead and go through complete the square. So your first step with complete the square is to add 4 on both sides. Once you do that, I have x squared plus, I'm going to say 0x, since there's no middle x, plus blank equals 4 plus blank. From here, you're trying to write this as something squared. So remember, you typically would take half of b, half of 0 would be 0, and then 0 squared goes in the blank. 4 plus 0 is 4. From here, I'm going to square root both sides, and I'm left with x plus 0 equals plus or minus 2. Your last step is to move the 0 over, so I have 0 plus or minus 2. My first answer, 0 plus 2, gives me positive 2, and my second answer, 0 minus 2, gives me negative 2. Now that we've solved with all of the different methods, I want you to look back and compare your answers. Take a second and reflect on what you see. What you should notice is that all of these methods are giving us the same answer. Negative 2, 0 and 2, 0 are the same thing as x equals negative 2, x equals 2, which is also the same thing as plus or minus 2, 2 and negative 2, and 2 and negative 2. On all of these, we get the same answer. So what's important is that you know the method behind all the answers. I'm going to go through and show you when you should use what method. For graphing, it really depends on the problem. With graphing, if it's a perfect point with no decimals, it's a really good way to just look at your x-intercepts. Graphing is also a good method when you have a calculator. You can always check the other methods by plugging in your question into the calculator and looking at the graph. Factoring really depends on the problem. There's multiple ways to factor. In fact, if you want to review on that, I would go back and watch the video on all the methods of factoring. Factoring always depends on the problem. Sometimes you'll be able to factor the problem, sometimes you won't. It really just depends. Now, for square root method, I would only use the square root method when your b value equals 0. What I mean by that is you have no middle x term. You can't use square root method whenever you have an x in the middle. Since you're trying to get x by itself, that extra x will not allow you to use square root method. So square root method only works when b is 0. Complete the square, I recommend using when b is even. You can use it when b is odd, but that will give you a fraction, so it'll get pretty messy. So I recommend using complete the square only when b is even. And then finally, quadratic formula. Quadratic formula will always work. If all of the other methods fail you, you can always go back to quadratic formula because this one will always work. Now, before we finish this video, I want to review the types of solutions for quadratics. With quadratic equations, you have 3 types of solutions. One solution means that your vertex is on the x-axis. I'm only crossing once. 2 solutions can look 2 different ways. It can look like this, where it's pointing up, crossing twice, or it can be pointing down, crossing twice. And then finally, no solution, which go back to one solution. One solution can also happen going down. It just means your vertex is on the x-axis. No solution means that you are not crossing the x-axis at all. So it can be going up, it can be going down, but you'll never cross. So remember with graphs, your solutions are where you're crossing the x-axis. It's your x-intercepts. Hopefully this video will help you to know when you can use what method. Just remember to look at your b value. If it's 0, you can do square root method. If it's even, you can do complete the square. Quadratic formula will always work, and factoring really just depends on the problem that you're given.